when you say going into the head, I'm thinking that you mean that you are going into the thought stream, identifying with the narrative of what's being thought, and then developing thoughts and feelings about what you're thinking and feeling.
Yes,
Yeah,
that is basically it. Yeah.
yeah. Well, the separate self, the personality, this selfing thing, only exists in the thinking, feeling, sensing, and perceiving. Really, it's a clearer pointer to say that thinking, feeling, sensing, and perceiving is the separate self. So those activities independently, and they tend to all come at once, is the separate self. So really, it's not a question that we can be rid of those functions. They're quite useful in the human experience, in interacting and communicating. And then, of course, there's thoughts and feelings about doing that, which is a much clearer symbol for the separate self, because we might have a thought or a feeling that we don't like, or that we claim as being negative, and then we shame ourselves for having it, or we don't respond to a situation from our true self, we might say. Then we develop negative thoughts and feelings about it. It might bring up shame tapes and kind of a lot of that stuff. It takes practice to get used to that, and also in more complex, if we've had very complex lives, then it might take work and support to work through all of that. And what did you say? You said you go into your head and then you go off with the thinking, but then you said something
Yeah.
else about it.
I go off with the thinking, and it's like I come out of my body and I feel a really horrible feeling when it's as if I'm just alive in my own head.
Okay, so if you're coming out of the thoughts, and then you have a horrible feeling. Is that right?
I'm coming out of like my body and just living in the head.
Okay.
And that leaves me with a horrible feeling of separateness.
How did you talk me through coming out of your body? What happens there?
Um, or, or I lose an awareness around the whole of me as a body and mind.
So there's a sense that you lose a sense of your true nature.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm left with a horrible feeling.
Yeah. Well, think about this. Who is the one who is regretting a sense of loss about their true nature? To who is that happening? When you look now, go to that one, find the one who's saying, oh no, I've lost my true nature. You say, is it like regret and remorse that you've been selfing again?
Yeah,
Okay.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
That must be the feeling.
Yeah. Well, the regret and the remorse, who does that belong to when you look now?
It's not my true nature.
No. So you probably haven't come out of anything. You're having thoughts and feelings about the thoughts and feelings you've had, but you're still really in it. If they're thoughts and feelings, they're objects, aren't they, that come and go?
Yeah.
And you've had some thoughts and feelings that are uncomfortable or that are less than favourable, but to who are they less than favourable? It's the self that's also saying, well, those aren't great thoughts and feelings, I'd rather be my true nature. So
Exactly.
in a way, Paul Hedderman's really good at this thing. It's like when the self hears this teaching, it tries to become a non-dual self. So it turns itself into a self that likes non-duality. And then when it thinks it's not in non-dual self, it says, oh, well, I've lost my true nature, but it's still self. Might that be happening? Does that make sense?
I think, yeah, something like that. I think that's what's happening.
Yeah.
It was really difficult to explain it. And I do like listening to Paul, that guy, but sometimes I can't hear what he's saying because he swears a lot.
Ah, I understand, yeah. He is good at that,
Funny,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
it gets in the way a little bit.
Okay, yeah, I hear that. Yeah. Well, let's do this one then, Julia. If you don't think about it, so don't use thought to notice your answer to this question. Locate your true nature. If you don't think, feel, sense or perceive your answer to this question, or use perceptions, what's left in your direct experience right now?
Being.
Okay, and you're very clear on that, aren't you? It didn't take you long to notice.
No.
Because that beingness is ever present. It doesn't actually go anywhere. And the thoughts and feelings of the so-called selfing, and then the return from that, and the regret and the remorse about that still belong in the self. The beingness is present to all of that. You don't actually go anywhere, you just become identified with the narrative of the thoughts and feelings.
Yes.
It's a natural curve at the beginning of exploring this way of expressing things. It becomes your teacher. It's showing you, right, okay, so this is a trap. This is one of the traps of it, that the self tries to become a non-dual self, and then it shows us also that thoughts and feelings about the thoughts and feelings are the self.
Yeah.
You don't apparently create a thought or a feeling. They arise and they fall. But there's the you that you've spent decades being is having thoughts and feelings about the thoughts and feelings that are spontaneously arising and claiming themselves as the doer of the thoughts and feelings, and then trying to improve the experience of the thoughts and feelings by not having them. There's a desire in there to not have particular thoughts and feelings. So it's all still the self. It's really good to see.
Oh wow, having that explained back to me really makes it clear.
Oh God, I'm just happy I made sense.
I understood it anyway.
That's really good news. That's really good news to me, yeah.
And I listened to Richard Spiro the other night. And,
He's brilliant, yeah.
Saying, oh, he's great. He was saying when his thinking kicks in, now he can witness it. So
Yeah.
if a story comes up, he can actually witness it and say to it, where do you think you're going?
Oh, that's nice, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What are you here for? And I really liked that. That's really stuck with me. That's really helpful.
That's a really beautiful movement, I mean, I think I learnt this in recovery culture as well. After about 5 or 6 years around that community, what I tried to do for about 5 or 6 years was to still seek happiness and happy states by using programs and practices and meditations and meetings to obtain happiness, and really it was becoming less and less authentic. And around year 5 or 6, I think, of being in a progressive community like that, I had this realization. I'd encountered Richard Rohr and Christian mysticism, James Finley, Thomas Keating, modern contemporary Christian mystics, and they pointed me back to historic mystics. And I realized this idea of like that suffering is the portal, so the whole idea of shortcomings and character defects flipped on its head, and instead of chasing happiness, I sort of became much more curious about shortcomings, selfishness, reactions to things, delusional patterns of thought, being inconsiderate. So all of these things became sort of like vessels for transformation. I realized that the way of the cross was an upside down economy. It wasn't about chasing happiness. It wasn't about seeking sadness, but it was about being okay with what I was thinking and feeling, really. The stuff I'd avoided through addiction for years, you know. And it became that thing that I talked about the other week, where you see complexity and difficulty and inner conflict and the lack of resilience and reactions and responses, and also through the amends process as well, of sort of saying to the shortcomings and the negative responses and the wounds and the unbrokenness and the emptiness and all of that kind of sort of toxic stuff, of saying, okay, come, and just allowing stuff to rise, just as we do in meditation, just as we do in non-duality. You know, when we start to embody, once we become really grounded in our sense of our true nature, we begin to embody the person that we have been and the person that we are, as those things come with us. You know, and as we've said before, in the end, we have them, they don't have us. We're not slaves to the rhythms of our past anymore. We are, a spontaneous new rhythm is created out of us. And if something old or something unfinished or something finished, but that we know its name and we're able to, as we said a minute ago, just like Christ, we name the moment correctly and say, yes, there's shame. Yes, there's difficulty. Yes, there's pain. Here is fear. I mean, look at us at the moment in this kind of, you know, the real viral component of the moment that we understand is fear, isn't it? You know, there's this massive wave of apparent possible endings that will have its way. And, you know, we can do what we can about that. But, you know, to just say, to be okay with that. And this is, you know, I think Bill Wilson of 12-Step Culture talked about emotional sobriety, and that's what that is. Moving into, I used to think emotional sobriety was an impossibility earlier on, but this movement around year 6 of like saying, okay, and starting to embody shortcomings and be okay with brokenness and woundedness, you know, the ground of self-acceptance that rose out of that, the ground of self-love and self-care became like, the way we might say it now is taking the separate self and its thoughts and feelings and its effervescent efforts to try and create peace by works and deeds. It's like taking a child by its hand, taking the separate sense of separation, and you know, and saying to it, come, take a seat, it's okay. The divine parent is here, moving through, allowing, accepting, you know, come, take a seat, it's going to be okay. And then, of course, the separate self is a spiritual fidget, isn't it? It'll go, and then it will get up out of its seat and try and control situations and events. We go, and we begin to parent the separate self in a mature and loving way. For sometimes, and for many of us, ways in which we weren't parented. You know, we break that cycle of trauma and difficulty and stuff, you know, that comes with us all, the wounds, you know, and in the end, the wounds stop weeping, but the wounds are still there, and we know them, and we're okay with them, but they're no longer weeping in a way that meant we had to keep pouring things into the wounds to medicate them. And this is what happens with the sense of separation, so much so that we realize that we're not separate. And then we notice the sense of separation, just as you've expressed today, as it comes and goes, and we get identified with it again. And then we come back from it. It points us back away from it. Everything points us to our true nature. So we abide once more as our true nature. And then slowly we become grounded in that, just as Richard was saying, as you said earlier, you know, where do you think you're going? You know, we begin to parent the separate self well, until in the end it's able to trust beingness enough to just hold its hand up and allow us to lead the way. And it becomes impotent in that way. It doesn't have the power that it once had, because it might still be present to have thoughts, feelings, senses, and perceptions, but it's like holding the hand of a fearful child, that when we look at the child with compassion and empathy and self-care and self-love, it's actually translucent, it's transparent, it's a see-through, imaginary, wounded child that for years and for many has had its way and been trying to take over our life, our communities, our politics, our world, and in some cases is in fact running certain countries that deem themselves very powerful. We have transparent children as leaders of our world with no interest at the moment in their true nature. They may get there, but for now we can at least be light bearers in a world of sometimes overwhelming shadow and darkness. And right now this is what the world needs more than anything, is us to abide as light. Yeah. Thank you.